in the history of technology, of mankind, and in fact biotechnology, well, not biotechnology, but biology as a form of naturally evolved technology, is that we see these trends that he describes and shows lots and lots of data around being exponential trends. So he uses the classic Moore's law to be able to show how computing price performance is just doubling every 18 months or whatever it is. He has a look at a number of different technologies and plots over time. Generally, he prefers logarithmic graphs to be able to show how the development of these technologies, are accelerating. And that a key concept that I understood out of it is that the more we progress in terms of the technology, the faster things go. And so that accelerating aspect or characteristic of the progress of technologies, he says, if you follow that curve all the way through with these broadly based described technologies, you arrive at a point where you reach a singularity. And he describes a singularity as really a point where these things almost kind of merge. These things, including ourselves, society, the stronger.
You had the robotics and strong AI, which is modifying your genetics, which is they all become one.
They become one, right?
Let me put it maybe a different way. One of the ways that he describes this is he claims that, well, he points out that technology has progressed so far in the last 100 years that given the logarithmic rate of increase, that in the next 7 years we'll accomplish what we did in the last 20. In the next 3 years after that, another 20. In the next year and a half after that, another 20. Such that every 5 minutes we're progressing another 20 years, such that in 100 years we'll have progressed 20,000 years worth of technology. The next 100 years will accomplish the equivalent of 20,000 years of technology progress. Now, considering that the vast majority of technology progress has occurred in the last, several hundred years, that's really quite an astonishing thought. And one of the things that crystallized it for me was he suggested, and actually I think it was Vince that suggested it, that the last machine you have to make is the one that can make one like itself. Yeah, it's self-replicating. Not just that it's replicating, but it's that it is intelligent enough to create one like itself and to improve. So once you create a machine that can create one like itself and can improve upon the design, it's the last machine man ever has to make.
That includes people.
But you have to expand the notion of what the machine is.
One additional thing is, he points out very succinctly, we are all nanomachines now.
That's true.
We are self-replicating.
One thing to consider is we are machines and we are self-improving, but we have a kind of a biological limitation of, 20-year generation. I mean, you could probably go down and say 13 years if you want to hit puberty. But we as humans have a limit to how fast we can make our next improved generation. Machines don't necessarily have that, or mechanical machines don't necessarily have that artificial limit in place. They don't have to wait 20 years to mature to make their offspring.
Right, and another theme I saw coming through the book, and it relates to memetics, right? Which is that evolution has gotten out to the point where it has become self-aware. The universe is self-aware. It created us, and at that point, the process of evolution keeps doing its job in a kind of blind fashion. However, with the advent of communications, the advent of things like the internet and technologies that allow us to be able to even more rapidly develop technologies that in turn are able for us to develop more technologies even more rapidly that allow us to be able to communicate more efficiently, is that this idea of the kind of a collective intelligence emerges from that. There's an image I saw the other day on TV, which is all the satellites that are orbiting Earth. And if you arrived as an alien sort of just exploring the solar system, and you saw this kind of blue dot and all the rest of it, and you try to figure out what the intelligent life is, if there's intelligent life, you might very well look at all the satellites and all the data pinging around these satellites as actually the intelligence that's going on. And you've got us little kind of workers, busy bees, kind of like feeding the system and making sure it's got enough power and it's getting smarter and all the like, and the intelligence. I don't know if anybody wants to either riff off of that idea, or any thoughts around that, or what it means to, I mean, what would it mean to, I think a related question is around identity. So assuming that we arrive in a place where we are instantly bound in terms of our thoughts, right, and sharing thoughts in a simultaneous fashion, that say Rob and I were able to literally plug in together, right? There was the Borg mind, no, the Vulcan mind merge, right?
Don't wish that on yourself.
Right, and you multiply that by 6 billion times, just in terms of, well, and then many more times of the number of interconnections between those 6 billion points. Would we still feel individuals? Will we still be individuals? Would it mean anything to have an identity you could describe as your own?
I'm not sure it means anything now. I mean, one of the ways I like to look at the world is that, you know, there's this thing, this all one thing. It's, you know, the stars, us, etc. And we're all made of the same energy. And then we're just kind of like, here's one person, here's another person that kind of pop up and are the consciousness of the universe. But we're all the same thing. And I don't think we really have identities now. I think we've kind of emerged, and we have a belief. As individual organisms, we have a belief that we have an identity. But truly, there's just a bunch of atoms freaking out.
Well,
So coagulate.
but isn't identity effectively fractal? That we perceive identity at a certain level, and you can step up and you start to see identity now changes. Instead of seeing individuals, you see groups or higher level structures. If you break down identity, you're now talking about possibly cellular. You could look at identity and talk about identity at different levels depending on what your abstraction is.
Yeah, how do you define identity?
But it may also be more complex than that, because it's true that you can look at, so there's this notion of the holon, right, where you have a hierarchical relationship between things, and each thing at the higher level of that ladder includes all those things below it, right? And life is a lot like that. So when you have a bunch of collection of molecules, and who was done looking at an individual molecule, you put enough of them together, and you get like a data. You couldn't have predicted from any of the molecules that you get this data. It's just one of those notions that this is emergence. That from a collection of simpler things can emerge more complex things that cannot be reduced to any of those individual elements. So who's to say that that stops? So we tend to sit back and think, oh, isn't that interesting? We've got a whole bunch of these little atoms together, and people emerged, and son of a gun, if living organisms emerged, and son of a gun, consciousness emerged as a result of the interactions of all of those things. But we tend to sit back and think that that's the end of emergence, that the end of the game was this notion of individual consciousness. So while it could be, I'm sorry?
Who's we? Most of the Singularity people kind of have that thought, and they talk about that all the time. It's like, you know, even in the book, have you read the book, Singularity?
I'm going through it now.
So within the first 100 pages, he talks about sort of the different stages of evolution, and the next stage of evolution is the sort of emergence of a hyper intelligence that sort of, you know, transcends multi-people or whatever.
That's
sort of
right.
thing you're sort of talking about.
That's right.
So it's sort of in the literature.
So yeah, that comes from the question from, you know, from if you were coming from outside of the planet Earth and you were looking upon Earth and you were trying to figure out what, if there was intelligence life out there, I think we seem to be at least agreeing at one level that it depends on the level of abstraction, as you put it, on how you define intelligence.
Let me just point out, for instance, everyone's seen time-lapse photographs of traffic, for instance, and you notice that individuality disappears things going on here, you really can't really tell it's actually intelligent other than these things are moving in lockstep with traffic lights and things like that. There are no individuals involved at that track.
Okay, so let me just, there's a thought there. So I could say that you either, let me just put a really simplistic question out there, which probably has no simple answer, maybe, but if we happen to believe that we have free will as individuals, or you may happen to believe that you don't. Well, let's assume that if you do you are you able to retain that sense of free will? Does that disappear at a certain level of abstraction? Does it disappear the more that we merge?
Well, okay, this is a very interesting question for me, because what I found personally, which, and as a small tangent, I find that what happens inside is a microcosm, what happens outside, and collectively just kind of ripples out. But what I found in my own development is I used to be a very, B.F. Skinner psychologist, there's a stimulus, there's a response, and you have no control because you're just a product of your environment, your genetics, and then things, behaviors are basically elicited from you. And as I've developed and grown and hopefully matured, but not much, what I've discovered for myself is merely having the experience or the belief that I am capable of doing free choice, choosing freely, then it's changed the way the world works for me. It's by, what's the meaning of life? Instead of sitting and waiting for someone to tell me the meaning of life, I can go, okay, well, I'm choosing the meaning of life for me is to have really interesting conversations with people or whatever. Then it puts me in more of a place where I have the ability to influence what goes on. But, so I'm curious about what people say about free will versus automatic.
Would the collective intelligence, assuming for one moment, if it did emerge, arguably it may be already there, would it itself have a notion of free will? Could it agree upon itself? Could it be able to rationalize at some point that it has free will, or that it ultimately must be bound to make whatever decisions it decides to because it's a product of what it is, historically?
You can look at sort of this, the hyper model as sort of being similar to mob mentality or group mentality. It's not entirely true, but the idea that groups have behaviors that are not necessarily related to the behavior of any of the individuals, and yet groups will act in intelligent or unintelligent fashions. And so this is, that to me is sort of like the first step towards this collective system. So we've already seen, cases where, groups will act in a very different way, like mob rule or mob mentality, will act in a very different way than any of the individuals will.
I just want to say I'm part of this bizarre majority religious sect that believes that I'm having experiences that are conscious, we call them conscious experiences, but they're different than processing. And I define my individuality in terms of experiencing. I've never seen out of any of your eyes. I've run simulations through some of your eyes, but I've never seen through your eyes. Okay, that's it. That's all I was going to say.
The point I was going to make, by the way, is that when you think about emergence, to think that the next thing is a superintelligence, which is, I think, one of the pieces that is in fact brought out in the book, misses the whole point of emergence. Because an atom, by definition, or a cell in your body, cannot in any sense grasp what it means to be conscious. Just as when we, as elements in a later emergent whole, we, by definition, cannot in any sense fathom any of the aspects of this proposed emergent entity.
But they can't fathom
by definition.
That's why it's a singularity.
That's, I think, the point of the book, the singularity, because you can't see past that event horizon.
Right. I disagree because cells can't interpret anything. They don't fathom anything.
They interpret things.
You can speculate away.
That model works the same way. You can look at a quantum, some unit of quantum value, some information at that level, and predict molecules from it. You can't look at molecules and predict some greater structure, just as it is conceivable, whether it's realistic or rational, but it is conceivable that a collection of human consciousnesses brought together would produce something that cannot be derived and couldn't fairly be called a superintelligence, because that's merely a logical extension of what you have today. And that would, by definition, be false if emergence is what
But maybe we're just not smart enough right now to be able to cope with it, because we're just wired up in a certain way and have a certain type of experience and understand certain things in certain ways. Which, nanotechnology, here's the combination of nanotechnology and robotics, maybe genetics to a certain degree. It posits that you get smart enough to be able to actually understand what it means to be an intelligent, whatever that next thing is.
But part of the singularity is that you as an individual are not that. There's a thing that is greater than yourself, and fundamentally that will always be bigger than what you can understand. We can't grasp what that is. And I think part of the confusion and uncertainty about this is because we fundamentally want to understand what that is. But once you bring together the people into some unit that then becomes self-aware in some way, it's operating at an entirely different level. We have not lost anything in this process. We may gain things, but it's a completely different thing. Our cells have not lost anything by being part of our greater unit. They are not fundamentally better or worse than an amoeba that functions independently and as an individual. Yet they are part of this bigger unit. It doesn't really mean much to them. They have advantages, but they haven't lost anything in them. But your point that they don't understand what that bigger thing is. This worry, I think, about losing your identity is because we are trying to understand what that bigger thing is, which fundamentally we can't. We might not even be aware that is there. It could already be there. Some aspect of that, at least, could already be there.
Okay.
So like the amoeba, I'm not worried about losing my identity. I would worry about being squished. I was in the way. We were in the way, and poof, Earth is gone. Or whatever happens, anything could happen.
So are you...
As a function of geopolitics.
We do comprehend corporations. We comprehend corporations that are hundreds of thousands of people large. We comprehend them, we see them, we understand them. I don't buy it. I'm sorry. They are superintelligences. They can do far more than we can.
There are superintelligences. They're not emergent phenomena.
Oh, they are. They are completely emergent out of our transactions and markets and so on and so forth.
That is a fair definition.
First of all, corporations are not superintelligences. Let's get that.
Why? Why?
They are not, because it's very obvious that group dynamics always works in the worst interest of the individual, not the best interest, if you think about it.
Wikipedia works against my interest?
What?
Wikipedia works against my interest?
Well, no, but Wikipedia is not.
Okay.
Well, no, hold on. I'd like to explore that a little bit further. I think there's a very important point that you're making there, which is that I think from what I'm hearing is that on the one hand, we may not ever be smart enough to be able to understand a different level of intelligence that we might consider to be smarter than us. And there's another perspective to say, well, we actually do comprehend this on a regular basis. We understand, potentially you could have a look at a company and make the analogy that it is an organism, that it is an intelligent organism, and yet we put regulations and boundaries and laws around that, and levels of accountability around those entities that potentially are smarter than any single individual. They can certainly do more than any individual. They can do worse. Like any technology, they can do bad things or good things. I think your point was that, well, they're not necessarily working in the interest of individuals.
Well, think about it. On the molecular level, there will now be machines that basically can take any piece of matter and disassemble it and make it into something else. Who's controlling those machines, or what entity is controlling those machines? And how does it act in your interest if you don't want to do that?
Look, let's go on a tangent off that into the nanotechnology space. There's a question that I don't have here, but I would like to throw up, which is the idea of the Napsterization of matter. Is the way that I've thought about it. So you take the scenario, which is, imagine that we get to the point where, we can create anything that we want. right? Essentially that we can take sand and make it into diamonds. We can take this, and you know, putting aside the fact that you can't turn atom into a different type of atom or molecule, but assuming that you're able to turn cheap stuff that is abundant into stuff that we consider of high value, including all the basics, food, this, that, and the other. So that, I guess my question is, if everything turns to free, which is a place that you might arrive at, continuing that thought, what transformation would happen, do you think, in terms of our economy? Would money mean anything? Would it mean anything to have to go to work?
Fundamentally, if you have a transformation, there's an energy input as well as matter input to cause a transformation. That energy had to come from somewhere. So both things had value before, so it's not free. There isn't such a thing as free.
Okay, but let me just for the moment postulate that, right, we got smart enough to figure out that problem, in that it doesn't become a constraint. I'm just
pointing out that the definition of the cost changes to the energy and the matter. So you're saying, when you're talking about free, you're meaning basically the work that goes into it is now, the cost drops almost to zero for a complicated problem. But you still have the raw materials that go into that work. Will always have cost.
But let's assume that cost is also taken out of the equation because the system, whatever it is, has figured out how to be able to mine those raw materials, so they also become a zero cost. I guess I understand.
You mean the near zero cost? You're not talking about the capital. You're not talking about the energy.
I'm not talking about science fiction in a real science fiction sense. I guess my question though is, would brands mean anything? Do they have more value in a world where everything becomes truly abundant? Does it?
It's the ultimate value, right? In this sort of future scenario, the only thing that's left of value is now intellectual property, right? Everything becomes intellectual property. Like your car is now intellectual property. Right?
But in a world where intellectual property,
in the literal way that exactly.
But intellectual property has an assumption behind it that you're still trying to monetize that intellectual property because you need money.
Well,
so what if we're in a place where basically money has no meaning because you can get whatever you want at that point? Sorry.
Basically, we still need a motivation then to continue doing interesting things. I mean, the moment, a car can be constructed for virtually nothing or some physical object, it's still the design, the pattern for that needs to be constructed, and that in of itself is a certain amount of work. At what point, why does someone want to bother to construct it?
But I guess, let's put it this way, I think where the book is coming from, one of these key ideas is the AIs take care of that thought process for us. They figure out if a car is required, just say for the sake of argument as an example, as an object is required, the AI would just go and figure out what the pattern needs to be, it'll go and figure out how to go and get the materials, and it'll just instantiate it for you.
What's the motivation of the AI to bother?
It's a very good question.
These very next surface.
These are political questions, and people want things far more than cars, and people want visions of life. They want houses to look a certain way and be neighbored to other houses that look similar. And human desires are much more than this thing.
The paradigm shift goes even deeper than that. The concept of house, the concept of abode, the concept of where you live disappear under these circumstances. You no longer require that. The only reason required is because of our biology. We basically convert energy at about 30% efficiency in the best case scenario, and we convert energy into thought at a certain efficiency as well. Well, what we're talking about is an increase in that efficiency well beyond what we're accustomed to. We no longer need a physical body, for God's sake.
So I think the question that you asked, I think is absolutely almost the key theme that you, or the key question that you arrive at, assuming that the singularity arrives, is what is the motivation for it, assuming that it is conscious and that it is intelligent, even if it is distributed so. What's its motivation for keep doing stuff? Because the implication is that it wants to keep improving, and that even if you hit the tipping point, right, of improving technologies to the point where you get to the theoretical singularity, it's still doing stuff. So what's motivating the stuff? What would motivate it?
Our motivations come from, basically satisfying our basic needs. I mean, I get up in the morning, I go to work, mainly because I want to keep a roof over my head, feed, eat, and the other things that give me pleasure. And if all of those become irrelevant, why do I want to get up, whatever the singularitarian version of getting up in the morning and doing something is? Why do I just, exist in some vacuum?
Because it brings you joy.
Well, my
Is joy the most important thing? No, your motivation is based on the monetary benefits. So when you define
The AI motivations we want to know about.
maybe there will be a total shift in the way you consider motivation. It need not be based on the.
Well, I think the mindset we're trying to establish here is that we all have to work. We all have to feed our biology. In fact, remember, this is the transcendent point where we no longer have to do that. What makes you want to continue your existence under those circumstances? You're not going to die, okay? You're going to be around for thousands of years. What the hell are you going to do with yourself?
What's a new incentive system?
Right, it's a new system of incentives.
And what might those incentives...
Probably.
Well,
Well, here's the point. You'll have the choice of either ending your existence or continuing as long as possible.
there's one point he made in answer to that question, which was, well, do you want to extend your life for an extra 30 years? If you asked somebody 200 years ago where the natural life expectancies were 35, that might look like a fairly miserable additional 35 years. If those additional 1,000 years, however, your peak performance and intellectual capacity and all the rest of it, it could be a choice. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
What I wanted to say is, a lot of these ideas, I also think that Kurt himself is sort of biased in his opinion on the singularity. He's obsessed with not dying. Yeah, literally obsessed with it.
Yes.
And a lot of what his thinking is colored by the fact that he doesn't want to die. He sort of looks at it from that angle, that I don't want to die, and how can I get there, and what's the best way to get there.
But I agree that he may have a personal motivation. I think it's also fair to say that if you have a look at the trends, it's maybe an inevitable kind of place that we'll get to, which is that we'll be just permanently self-repairing.
So let me come at it from the devil's advocate side, because I also feel that Kurt has absolutely no understanding of human biology.
That he hasn't.
Nobody does.
Oh, right.
Nobody does. We don't even know how cells interact, for crying out loud. People are starting to find out. We don't even know the yeast interact.
I guess this is where he invokes, though, the robotics and the strong AI, that he says, we'll need to understand it up to a level, and then you let the AI figure it out for you.
I think he trivializes biology by doing that. Because evolution does not go for perfection. It finds something that works, it stops. There's no evolutionary pressure to go forward. In a material world, you're always trying to get better. Evolution.
Well, so no, hold on a second. So, hold on. I think in terms of evolution in the biological sense, right? Evolution probably does kind of stop doing its thing if there is no evolutionary pressure. However, the notion that we have already, there is maybe why are we developing technologies that allow us to be able to live for longer and all the rest of it? There's maybe an artificial evolutionary pressure that we put upon ourselves.
Yes, and I completely agree with that. That does manifest itself. I think the question I have is, he takes a very simplistic view that AI and robotics as we know it will be able to control our evolution, but until you understand...
We're already doing that.
No, we don't.
We already...
Believe me, we don't.
You don't think...
You can't even tell what your prognosis for certain disease is today. You can predict that you might have, and that's not true for everything, but there's no way you can tell for guarantee that you can get cancer. There's no way.
Right. Well, that's what, but his point is that what we didn't know 20 years ago is different than what we do today. And that the rate of change is such that the questions you're raising, the
criticisms you're raising will be answered very, very quickly because of the rate of change. And he would agree completely that we don't even know a whole variety of things, but that the rate of change means we will. And
so I guess my argument about being that I think the rate of change that he predicts is incorrect.
Well,
in that aspect.
Okay,
Yeah.
but let's say if he's off by 100 years or 1,000.
Yeah, so
doesn't matter.
It becomes a timeline. Yeah.
Yes, on that topic, the rate of change is an area that I'm kind of curious about. I mean, if one area where we have exponential changes in Moore's law, that's it.
No.
Software is not changing exponentially, energy is not, transportation is not, civil engineering is not. So when you look at the entire landscape of technology, most is fairly mature, fairly quiet, not doing a whole lot. They might have had their heyday in the past. Moore's law is changing exponentially. So my concern is to extrapolate from this one small area and say, oh, technology A to Z is changing.
But which, so do you mean, and when you say Moore's law, are you talking about the price performance ratio specifically on the chip?
Yeah,
right.
That's obviously changing.
So I think that's a fair point, and I think it's fair to say as well that he provides a great deal of evidence in the book to show that it isn't actually just computational power that where we're seeing exponential trends in terms of price performance, that there are a number of areas around science as a whole where we're seeing that trend. Maybe some others can give examples, but I just wanted to call that out, that I think he's not just using, well, my point is he's not just using the price of the Intel chip as and extrapolating from that single point.
I would argue that his argument is quite weak when it's outside Moore's law. I mean, that's not true. If you could turn the clock back 50 years, or ahead 50 years, you could have similar examples of, look at this and this and this, just amazing stuff. Well, yeah, it's amazing. It's always been amazing. The general curve going up is where I have a problem.
So it does.
Are you saying that he's factually incorrect in what he presents in the book in the areas of engineering, biology?
No. What I'm saying is
because he doesn't focus his time on Moore's law. That's a very tiny part of the
fair enough. What I'm saying is, in 1950, if you want to find a similarly long list of things that are really, truly, fantastically amazing, you could. Or in 1900. Or in 1850, just amazing. And so I think that when he's sort of picking and choosing his examples, I mean, if he were fair, he would say, look at energy. Not a whole lot happening. You know, fuel cell, leading edge, it's been around for 150 years. Solar cell, similar, and not rather obscure. I mean, so that would be a fair description. So a few cases where things are really happening, hot, genetics, you know, nanotech perhaps, other areas, bigger field, not a lot.
Here's a question I've just thought about based on that there, because I was thinking, well, if from an engineering perspective and technology perspective, if we couldn't do it ourselves, would we be able to develop or evolve AIs that would be able to get to those points of exponentiality? Which is one question, and that led me to another, which is, would we still get to the singularity if we were to strike any one of these? Or do you need all three of these in order to be able to arrive at the point?
You only need one thing, and that's strong AI.
Which begets the rest.
Thing, right? The basic of his...
That's the hardest one.
Everything else you can simulate.
It's the hardest one to get to.
So, whatever this is, it does need some physical structure involved.
But what your point is, if I understood it right, is that once you get to, you could say, well, let's assume we make no progress or near zero progress on that in the next 1,000 years, you know. However, the moment that you're able to get to the strong AI of the type that he describes, you get these things for free, essentially. We don't have to do this.
Half an hour, but whatever.
But why? Why is it
basically like 1,000 years of technological progress?
And back to the motivation. If you create a strong AI that's capable of understanding our molecular biology better than we do, why would it be motivated to help us?
Hopefully, altruism.
I mean, at that point, the singularity has achieved for that entity, not for humanity.
Why are you motivated for his children? Because there is this. Why do you have virus encodings in your DNA? I mean,
but we are not his children. It would look at us and go, I couldn't. A potential. You know, this is again getting back to the.
Every fiber of it was made to serve us. Every single fiber of it was made to serve people.
No, it was made to. It may have been made that way, but this is something that's built on top of that. And if it's self-aware, that doesn't mean we're aware of it. It means it's aware of itself. And at that point,
are you aware of the coding that tells you to?
But at that point, it's only motivated to improve us enough to continue its existence.
You don't have to understand genetics to want to mate.
But you're genetically predisposed to.
Yes.
So, I don't know. I agree. We don't know. We flat out don't know. But I suspect that there's something of us being the makers and creators that will see through.
Please.
I have a question, and that is, why do we care?
Why do we care?
Why do you care?
Why do I personally care? Why do we care collectively?
Because I frankly don't want to die. I have this big fear of it. And that, honest to God, that's the truth. And I like the idea of being alive for a long time because I really, really like it.
So what would your life be like if you knew right now that you weren't going to die? What would be different?
What do you mean by not going to die?
I'm not a darn thing, and that's perfect because I want to keep doing exactly, precisely what I'm doing
Well, there
for
will
a
be
really long time.
There will be something.
Just got a parachute by now.
No. Well, if anybody wasn't going to die, I might do some.
I think he does answer that question somewhat. He says when he's extrapolating what would we be, what would it do, right? Back to the motivation question. He argues that basically this thing will just go out and keep learning. It'll just want to keep learning and learning and learning and learning. And
it's a reflection of him, and that's what he wants to do.
Yeah,
Right. That's what I
He's
mean.
very motivated by that.
He can only use as a model the concept in his own head. Let me go off someplace else. We talked about time for a moment, and maybe it's just because of the age I've reached, but I think it's fairly clear that time for me, as an appreciation duration, has changed dramatically. Like, I still have my Christmas tree lights up in some areas in my Christmas lights up in some areas in my house, and it's astonishing to me that Christmas is like so close. In other words, every year for me, the time passes so much faster than it does for my kids, who see every year as like, oh my God,
Right.
it'll take forever until I'm 18.
But when you're 10 years old, 1 year is 1/10 of your life, right? When you're 40 years old, it's a 40th of your life.
There's 2 points. Right. Well, yes, it could be that it's simply relative, and that. So what happens when you are 1,000 years old? Number one, right?
Time goes really fast.
Time just must go by like really fast. But the other thing Kurzweil talks about that adds to that is that time may in fact be relative to your own internal processing capabilities. So if you're able to process several 100,000 times more quickly than you're able to process now by virtue of having better machinery, the whole appreciation of time may not be conceivable from here.
That's actually a very valid point. I mean, just take what we do in daily life, for example. There's things that run a computation, if I can use that example, is to take a full PhD course. Now it takes 2 days.
Does that,
The appreciation of time may change very dramatically.
well, can I ask then? I'm not a Buddhist, and I've never practiced Zen seriously. But if I've understood that side of things, is that what you do is do your brain waves slow down in that context? If you're meditating, for example, or you Zen out?
It depends on what you do, but there is a lot of fMRI research now which does show very specific and reduced brainwave patterns when people are.
So is it fair to say that it's processing less? From a pure computational perspective?
I can't interpret it, I can only say.
I just wonder what happens to time in that respect, the perception of time in that.
Yeah, 2 comments here. First of all, our session is running out.
How long do we have?
We have another 10 minutes. I let it go long because you started late. But the other thing is there's a duality involved here. There's not only going to be new entities that we create that will become intelligent, but there will be humans who basically, put the nanites in their brain and virtualize themselves. And if anybody can detect, other human beings from the trepidations of something that doesn't understand what it is to be human, it would be another human that has been converted essentially into a superintelligence. So understand that is the choice you have. We're all on this freight train, okay, and it's getting faster and faster and faster. And we have some choices that we need to make now about that. What of us are going to become virtualized? How do we handle these entities which everyone is scared of because they don't know what it is to be human? They don't know what the values are about thought, about how we've lived our lives till now. And And so those are your choices. It's not that someone's going to force you to become virtualized. That option will be available to you. You go down and you buy your Sony virtualization kit, and you inject yourself.
It seems to me like no matter how it works out, if we, without knowledge and understanding of the past, we fuck up the future. So people start coming in and not knowing what it is to be human. I think it's going to lead some problems. So what we do have, we're trying to.
Or are you going to fuck up their future, not knowing what it is to be done?
Well, the future's not done yet, so I guess.
Don't mess with my babies.
I just think that if we're going to move on and change things, that they ought to understand where they came from and how it got there to be able to handle it better. I mean, other than just appearing on the scene and not knowing anything of the past.
Well, there's a big storage.
Yeah. The good news is it's going to take a while, and hopefully by then that's nonsense in some sense. What to do.
I don't want to be part of Singularity 1.0.
No, yeah, then 2.0. So let's talk about, I think we just touched on there, I think the topic here is, we've got 10 minutes and we will hard stop to be fair for the other team. Unfortunately, we started late, that's just the way that it works. So we'll finish in about 7 minutes. So I think we touched on there, what are the risks? I was hearing some of that.
Like 3 or 4 minutes because there's transitions.
Okay. What are the risks?
I think what he said was number one risk. Will we be at a stage where we can learn enough from what we've done? And we have enough of a sense of where we are going, because right now we don't have a really good idea that we manage it well. There's going to be some risk, but how do we manage that risk?
What are the risks?
I think getting back to it earlier, I think it's possible that when we get uploaded the first time, we may see something very interesting about individuality. That maybe it isn't what Western people minds assume to be. I think that's possible.
Okay, I'm getting a sense that we just have to cut down. Do you want to say something?
Another risk would be dividing into two-class systems.
Two-class system. So before everybody goes, I wanted to do a hand poll, right? Would you like the singularity to happen? Put your hand up. Would you not like the singularity to happen? Interesting. Well, thank you very much.
I think it's already here.
Thank you very much for coming.
Notes. I typed up everything I wanted.
Oh man, thank you. That's so cool. Well, maybe we should whack it up on the wiki, or we could stick it up on the blog somewhere.
Let's put it on the wiki. Yeah.
Can I? Have you got a card? Thank you. Have you got a card or?
Oh no, I don't. I can give you a piece of paper with my name on it.
Yeah, that'll do.
I got that everything. Yeah.
Apparently, yes.
My name's Adam. I've been an avid reader of your blog since the last Mind Camp.
Hey, good to meet you, Adam. How are you?
Good.
So, where are you at?
Well, I work for a couple local startups.
Thank you. Let me give you my card. I'll be back in a second. Hey, how's it going? I'll give you one as well.
The bookmarks of the social bookmark that I did in
And then help share is another startup.
I know, Q&A, right? And unfortunately, there's no such way you can draw right. Help share. Funny thing to do.
much happening, right? Things like the automation, some people